talk to you about talking about sex. Researchers published a meta-analytic review that found that being able to talk with your partner about sex is tied to all kinds of good stuff. More sexual desire, more sexual arousal, more reliable erections and orgasms and lubrication and enjoyment of sex. But here's my question. Did you ever learn how to talk to a partner about sex? I doubt it. It tends to not be covered in sex education classes. I'm Dr. Alexandra Solomon, and I'm a couples therapist and a professor, and I'm passionate about helping people have the tools and insights they need to create happy and healthy, intimate relationships. So in this video about talking about sex, I want to start by telling you that my definition of sex is a big, broad one, as is the case for most relationship and sex educators and sex therapists. When I talk about sex, I'm talking about a big umbrella of erotically charged behaviors. I'm not just talking about penis and vagina intercourse, which tends to be our association with the word sex. And the reason it's important that you know that I use a broad definition of the word sex is this. When we limit a definition of sex to just that one sexual act of penis and vagina intercourse, we render invisible the experiences of all people who are LGBTQ+, right? They're just sort of out of the equation. We further kind of create this hierarchy that says that one form of sexual behavior, that one sexual act, is somehow more sex than anything else. This is problematic because for those who have vulva, it turns out that penis and vagina intercourse tends to not be one of the more orgasm-producing behaviors. And while pleasure and orgasm are not the same thing, we can have pleasurable sexual experiences without experiencing orgasm. And in fact, you can have an orgasm without having the subjective experience of it being pleasurable. It is important to keep in mind that if orgasm is something that we're seeking in a sexual experience, for those with a vulva, intercourse tends to not be one of the more reliable pathways to orgasm. Further, for those with a penis, if we hold sexual intercourse as the most sex, or the only thing that counts as sex, it ends up creating undue pressure on people with a penis to have to get and maintain an erection. And pressure and great sex tend to not go particularly well together. So in this video, when you hear me use the word sex, know that I'm talking about a big umbrella of erotically charged behaviors. Here's what the research tells us. The research tells us that those who are able to talk about sex tend to have better sex. And the research tells us that those who enjoy the love they make tend to have happier relationships, enjoy their relationships more, and they end up being more likely to stay together. So being able to talk to your partner about what you want and what you need in the bedroom is essential. But we don't have a lot of modeling for how to do that. In the movies where we see sex scenes, the sex tends to unfold wordlessly. Nobody's really talking about what's happening, and it's happening rather seamlessly, fluidly, flawlessly. In pornography, there may be a lot of talk, but it's dirty talk. It's not necessarily wholehearted feedback back and forth in which two people are creating an experience that they're both going to enjoy. So the thing that's most essential is for you not to beat yourself up if talking with your partner about sex is challenging, because it makes total sense that there haven't been a lot of opportunities to figure out how to have these sorts of conversations. So a conversation about sex must start with a deep sense of self-compassion, generosity of spirit, and knowing that this gets easier with time and with practice. The coolest part about all this is that when it comes to sex, we all get to be lifelong learners because we have to be lifelong learners. Our sexuality, our sexual self grows and changes and evolves as we do. So we have to keep getting to know ourselves again and again. And that's what's really important here, is that a conversation with your partner about sex has to begin with some foundation of you understanding your own sexuality. And when we use that word sexuality, we tend to only think about sexual orientation, the gender of the people you are attracted to. But your sexuality is actually much, much more than that. Your sexuality is your entire relationship with the world of the erotic. How erotic energy flows through your body, what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy, how you define pleasure, how you experience pleasure. So learning a bit more about your sexuality is what I call sexual self-awareness. And sexual self-awareness is about the exploration of your relationship with you. It's you answering questions like, how did I learn about sex in the first place? What was the quality of that sex education? Was it infused with love and a sense that sexuality is a normal, healthy part of life? Or was it infused with quite a bit of fear about sex as being sinful, dirty, dangerous, risky, wrong? Another aspect of sexual self-awareness is thinking about what you like, what turns you on, what turns you off. Another aspect about sexuality is understanding how messages you've internalized about gender affect how you experience your sexual self. Being raised as a boy, as a girl, as a man, as a woman, even if you live now beyond a gender binary, most likely you internalize messages that were gender loaded that shape what you feel able to ask for and how you expect yourself to show up in the bedroom. So understanding those messages, how they linger inside of you, and the ways in which they may constrain or limit your ability to really experience a full range of desire and pleasure is an important aspect of sexual self-awareness as well. The bottom line in terms of sexual self-awareness is that it's important because your relationship with yourself sets the foundation for all of the relationships you are in your entire life. So you being able to understand, relate to, and work with your own sexual energy, your own sexual self is really important, because then you go into a conversation with a partner from a place of being grounded and connected to who you are, and that connection to self is what sets the foundation for intimacy and connection with another person. So let's talk now about two different scenarios. Scenario one is talking about sex with a new sexual partner. Scenario two is talking about sex with a partner that you've been in a relationship with, but you really want and need to have some conversations about sex. So situation one, new relationship. Some of the things I want you to be thinking about before you enter the bedroom. One of the things that's challenging is that once we are in a sexual situation and things are getting hot and heavy, it's really difficult to have these conversations. So talking ahead of time, talking before, is not unromantic. In fact, it is basically the two of you sort of planning for this journey. So a conversation about sex before you've had sex can be a beautiful way to create a foundation for an experience that's going to be really rich and really fun and really together. Things I want you to be thinking about in terms of this conversation: boundaries. What for each of you guys is on the table and what's off the table in terms of sexual behaviors. It doesn't have to be a forever thing, but a for now thing. And here again, rather than it being a conversation about negotiation, right, or sort of where are the limits, where are the outer limits, think of it as each of you guys sort of putting ideas into the center to figure out and explore together. So it's again creating a rough map, not an outline, but a rough map, the parameters, the container in which this fun experience is going to occur. Also really important to talk, of course, if the kind of sex you're going to have could result in a pregnancy, to talk about how to prevent an unintended pregnancy, how to prevent an STI, sexually transmitted infection, and then what will happen if one or both of you needs to pause, slow down, stop, redirect. So talking ahead of time about just saying out loud to each other that one or both of us, that either one of us is fully authorized to give feedback, to press pause, to take a time out. It's really lovely to say that ahead of time and create that as part of the expectation before things get going. If you can't imagine having any part of this conversation with a new partner, I'd like you to relate to that as a data point. That's a gut check. That's an important thing for you to pay attention to. If the idea of this conversation fills you with trepidation or fear or dread, or if it just feels impossible, pause and unpack that a little bit. What's important to discern is how much that feeling of dread has to do with your own discomfort or struggle talking about sex, versus how much that feeling of dread has to do with talking about it with this potential sexual partner. If it's the former, the idea that talking about sex in general just makes your cheeks flush, that's just an invitation for you to continue to compassionately and curiously and gently continue to figure out what blocks your ability to feel really comfortable and really at ease with sexual expression. That's the work of sexual self-awareness. If it's the latter, that it's not that you're uncomfortable talking about sex, it's that you can't imagine talking about it with this person, pay attention to that. That feels to me like a relationship red flag. That suggests to me that that person is not working with you to create a relational space that feels safe, respectful, fun, understanding. It suggests to me that potentially that person is critical, judgmental, controlling, and those are all red flags. And those are all the kinds of qualities in a person that don't make for a really rich, playful, fun sexual experience. The last thing I want to say in terms of talking about sex with a new potential sexual partner is this. The first sexual experience with somebody doesn't necessarily equal the forever sexual experience with somebody, right? It takes a while to establish flow, to learn each other. And that sometimes that foundation of experience then becomes the platform from which you can infuse even greater creativity, play, expression. So don't put all your eggs in one basket of that first sexual experience. Needs to be the end all be all, because there again, pressure and sex are a lousy combination. So be gentle with yourself, be gentle with your partner, and know that a sexual relationship is an unfolding sort of thing. Let's move on to situation number 2, which is you are in an intimate relationship, an ongoing intimate relationship. You are sexual with this person, but you're aware that either you haven't talked about sex or you need to talk about sex. There's something that you're curious about, something you're interested in, something you want to give feedback on. In this situation, a good place to start is by asking yourself, what's getting in my way? What's blocking me from being able to talk with my partner about sex? Oftentimes what I hear from people is what blocks them is a fear of hurting their partner's feelings. And the first thing I want to say about that is there's something quite beautiful about being worried about hurting your partner's feelings. It means that you are sensitive. It means that you're empathic. It means that you're invested in doing this in a way that ends up creating connection versus something that ends up feeling hurtful or that creates conflict. So some suggestions I have around this conversation are to remember first and foremost that anything you want to say to your partner around feedback, I don't like this isn't working for me, anything that has to do with feedback, it needs to be phrased in the language of we. I love these aspects of our sexual life together, but I'm struggling with this thing that we've found ourselves falling into. When it comes to sex, it is not your partner doing something for you and to you. You have a role as well. Even if you are in any given moment the one receiving pleasure, there's a role there as well, right? Sort of creating the conditions in which your partner is providing pleasure to you in a way that they know is going to be something that you find pleasurable. So everything that has to do with a couple's sexual relationship together is about the we. It's never you are letting me down or you are doing it wrong. So if you're noticing shame and blame creeping into this conversation, it means the two of you have lost that really juicy and essential language of we, that this is our sexual connection together. That's the first thing. The second thing is to be positive. So Dr. Tammy Nelson, a wonderful sex therapist, says that rather than saying to your partner, don't go left, you say to your partner, I love it when you go right. So anything we need to share with our partner that's in terms of feedback of something we don't like, it can be framed in the positive. I love this. I want more of this. Would you be available for more of this? So that's the frame it as a we, the be positive. Don't be critical. So this is sort of the natural outgrowth of the other two, right? So if you notice yourself wanting to be critical, check in with yourself. What's the thing inside of you? What's the yearning? What's the longing? And figure out how you can frame it in terms of self. I'm wanting, I'm longing for, I'm finding myself. rather than pointing a finger at the other person, which is just going to create the conditions for defensiveness and disconnection, which is the opposite of what you want. You're bringing up sexuality, your sex life, because you want greater connection. You want something different than what you have. As I was saying before about a new sexual relationship, even in an ongoing sexual relationship, stay on the lookout for ways you can have this conversation outside of the bedroom. When people are already in the unfolding of a sexual experience, it can be too vulnerable, too disruptive, too complicated to have that conversation in bed once things have started. So look for conversation starters outside of the bedroom. It could be a scene from a movie, it could be an article, it could be this video as sort of a jumping off point for let's have this conversation. And another point is that you don't have to, I think sometimes we can think that conversation has to be face-to-face looking at each other. It doesn't have to be. There are lots of ways to have a conversation. So here are some thoughts about how to have this conversation in a way that has a bit more scaffolding to create more comfort, more ease, more flow. And these are all different tips and suggestions that I have picked up in my journeys along the way, whether it's a couple approaching me after a talk I've given or a couple in my therapy office or something I've read. These are all suggestions that I have sort of been gathering and am excited to share with you. One suggestion is you can use an app. There's an app called Kindu, Kindu, which is a swipe-based app that both partners put on their phones, and you swipe left for things you're not interested in, and you swipe right for things that you are interested in. Then the app creates a menu or a template for new possibilities, new potential experiences. So an app can sort of take the pressure off that face-to-face conversation. Another thing to think about is setting the stage. What's the context in which the two of you know your walls are down, you're relaxed, there's an ease, there's a flow. Maybe it's in the bathtub, maybe it's while you're out on a walk, maybe it's during a drive. So just honoring that context shapes experience. Another option, I've heard of couples who use puppets to have this conversation, where there's a way in which they use play, imagination, make-believe, and the characters can have a conversation that the couple may be having a hard time having. It may not be where you always land around sex, but if that's a place to start, then that's a place to start. You also may find it helpful to write letters to each other. Sometimes having that space, that individual space, it helps you access your own sexual self-awareness, your own thoughts and questions and ideas, and sharing them on paper can then sort of ease the tension and give your partner something that they can sit with and respond to mindfully and thoughtfully. If you'd like a modern twist, my friend Esther Perel suggests that couples have an email account that is just for the business of love. No logistics, no planning, no talking about the kids, but on this email account, all we're doing is talking about how the two of us are cultivating intimacy. So see if any of those suggestions help kind of set the stage for this conversation. The bottom line is be gentle with yourself and your partner. You may need some trial and error to figure out what works for each of you guys. And remember that the more you do this, the easier it becomes. There you have it, brave love warrior. You deserve nothing less than sexual experiences that are pleasurable, that are healing, that expand who you are as a person and who you and your partner are to each other. Practicing and getting more comfortable with talking about sex is a great pathway towards growing your sexual self-awareness and ensuring that you have a sex life that feels really good to you. For more on sexual self-awareness, watch the next video in this playlist.